sounds like a stupid question.
Probably is, because, yeah, go ahead. Skilled managers equals high morale, which equals all that cool stuff that you cannot pay for and you can't punish for.
When you close off that feedback channel, you are not going to be able to hear the truth.
In the first microseconds, your brain can't tell the difference between physical danger and what we call social danger.
I'm pissed off at you.
Me, specifically?
Well, just because you're my boss and all.
Employees tend to get promoted until they reach their level of incompetence. Go forward and don't suck. Welcome back to the Managing with Mind and Heart podcast. I am one of your hosts, Michael Nash.
My name is Ethan Nash, and we are with Nash Consulting.
Absolutely. And we've been working on a series together, talking with you all about healthy teams, about healthy executive teams, healthy leadership teams. This is our 5th episode. We are working up the levels of a model that was originally created by Patrick Lencioni. We've modified it a tiny bit, but we are finding this model to be really effective as we go in to work with teams. So, I don't know, Ethan, you want to maybe just kind of quickly review the model with our lovely listeners?
Yeah, the very first level of this model that we're using to build healthy teams is called trust, right? And trust here is really the key principle is creating psychological safety in your group, right? Where team members feel safe to speak up, right? They feel free to state their opinions, and really they just trust one another enough to show up in all their humanness, right? Weaknesses and all. And this is really, as we'll get to, a prerequisite for achieving results. Okay, so that's trust.
The ability to show up authentically, that's created because we have that sort of psychological safety, allows us to move up to the next level, which according to the model is called conflict. We've kind of reframed it a bit. This is the level that's all about the ability to have authentic conversation, including disagreement, right? To talk about ideas, to debate ideas, to really show up with what you think, what your opinions are. If you don't have psychological safety, of course, you can't have these kinds of conversations, right? And if you can't have these kinds of conversations, we can't move up to the next level, which is
commitment, right? And really the most effective teams, after they've been able to have honest and authentic discussion, even debate, they're then able to make a decision. And then even if there's not a consensus, people can still commit to that decision and leave the room knowing that they're all in that room are going to be committed to this decision, wholeheartedly. And so when team members are able to do that, right, when they're able to, fully and explicitly state their opinions and have conflict, they're able to reach that commitment to a decision together. And it just becomes a lot more likely that people are going to what?
Hold each other and themselves accountable. The next level up is called accountability. And again, if I don't have psychological safety, we can't then freely disagree and talk about things authentically. If we don't have that, we can't commit to anything. And if I don't really fully commit and you don't commit, it's impossible for us to hold each other accountable, right? It's just not going to happen. Mm-hmm. So, and if we don't hold each other accountable, of course, to the decisions we've made or the commitments we've made, we'll never reach the top level, which is called
results, which is what we're all aiming for with building a healthy team, right? The whole point of this is to be able to achieve the intended results of the organization, however an organization defines those results.
I've seen a lot of groups, and I think all of us have been part of groups like this, where there's a meeting, there's some discussion, there's a decision, it's a little fuzzy. People don't follow through on their commitments. Nobody holds each other accountable. And then whatever that decision was doesn't ever get enacted, right? Or it gets enacted poorly, or it just lasts for a couple months and then it falls off the radar. That's what we're talking about when we're talking about results, right? We're talking about being able to start something and then carry it on to completion and then enjoy the rewards of the success.
Absolutely. So there it is. That's the model in full. Again, it's trust, conflict, commitment, accountability, and results. And as we said a number of times now, you don't necessarily have to master, for instance, trust before you can start working on conflict or working on commitment, right? It's a little more fluid than that. But the point is, all these pieces come together to create a healthy team, which drives you towards the positive results that you're looking for. So today, folks, we're going to dig into this model further and start with talking about commitment. And so to reiterate what we just said earlier, when teams trust each other enough, right, they will engage in authentic conversation more readily. And when people can engage in those authentic conversations, right, have ideological disagreements or debate and air what they feel and how they feel, it's going to be a lot more likely that when it comes time to make commitments, if people had their voice heard and they feel like they were respected, they're able to commit to that, even if it's not necessarily the way they would have chose if they were deciding all on their own, right? But they had a chance to have their voice heard, and that's
Right.
the point of commitment.
Exactly. And I want to just say here that I think the bottom line on this level, the level called commitment, is it's important. I think we keep saying this every episode in this series. It's important that leadership teams talk about all this stuff we're talking about right now, as opposed to just jumping in and doing the work, right? When you get to commitment, there has to be an agreed upon culture. And this is super important. In this executive team, for example, in this leadership team, we have a commitment to commitment. Like that is actually one of the hallmarks of our culture among us, meaning when we leave this room, what we've decided, no matter how messy it was to get there, no matter how long it took us to get there, no matter where we landed, we are going to walk out of this room and we're going to say we're going to say we decided, right? That even before you have a discussion about something that you disagree with, that needs to be a commitment that the group makes together, right? And that's true for all these levels. We really have to talk through these levels as a team and make commitments to being this kind of a team. So let's be the kind of team that knows how to commit. So I would start with that before we even get into any specific discussion.
A team that knows how to commit. So they know how to walk away and say we, right? And that's the end state, but there's a lot of things that happen before they're walking away from that room saying we've committed to this.
Yeah, but let's start with the end in mind, right? Let's start with the idea that that is the goal, and which means no one's going to walk out of here and say, well, here's what they decided, I didn't agree, right? Or it was stupid because so and so said this, and no one's going to do that. And that's not something you want to discuss at the end of your first disagreement. You want to talk about that as you're becoming a healthy team. We're going to be the kind of team that's committed to commitment, and if it takes longer to get there because we're just not there yet, then let's take the time it takes, right? Let's not have false commitment. Let's not do the nodding and smiling and then walking out of the room and bad mouthing the decision. So that's a commitment that needs to be made up front.
Okay. So you make that commitment up front. Again, people had a chance to air what they think about things, right? Now it comes down to making the commitments, right? It comes down to, okay, we got to agree on a path forward, right? Where would you go with a group on helping them understand how to get there, understanding how to land on commitment, knowing that all that prerequisite stuff was done?
Okay, yeah. Knowing they've already committed to commitment, how do you get there then? How do you teach them to get there? Without being too redundant, I would remind them that again, of the psychological safety that we need to keep building so that we can actually have really authentic discussion. So I know we've talked about that for 2 episodes. I'm not going to get into it, but I would just remind the group that don't short circuit that piece. Talk about it, make sure everyone feels heard, et cetera. Now, side note on that, it's just real life. There's going to be time limits, right? It's just real life. It's okay to have time limits. It's okay to say, for example, we have, because of what's happening in real life right now in this organization, we actually only have 45 minutes to discuss this. So the leader, I'm going to make a decision about this after discussion, but we're going to finish the discussion in 45 minutes. So those are our boundaries. Within that container, let's be honest, let's share what we think, let's watch our airtime, make sure the leader's facilitating it well, all the stuff we talked about in the last episode. But now we're done, right? The decision is made. I've come back as a leader and I've said, okay, here's what we're going to do. Or as a group, we've had a consensus, whatever it took to get there. Now it's time to commit, right? First thing I'm going to ask groups to do is don't leave your meetings until you've covered what we call the ABCD at the end of every meeting, right? The A stands for action items. Who is going to do what? B stands for by whens and by whom. It's important that we don't leave these action items sort of open-ended and it doesn't really matter when it happens or who's going to do it. Be really specific about the by when and the by whom. And that in and of itself, by the way, is a commitment issue. The C stands for communication items. What did we discuss here today that needs to be communicated? And that also has a by when and by whom. And the D stands for decisions. What did we decide, or what did we almost decide, but we circled around and around and we never actually made a decision? We didn't decide. Let's clean that up right now. Let's make a decision. So it's hard to commit to anything if there's not clarity, right? And I think A, B, C, and D is a discipline that helps us end our meetings with clarity about these things. So that's where I'd start.
Yeah, you think you hit the nail right on the head there. Of doing the ABCD is all about making it absolutely clear what we're committing to and what we're going to walk away from this meeting and do, right? Because take another scenario where, for instance, maybe the group kind of landed on a fuzzy decision and they said, great, so this is the decision. All right, meeting adjourned, right? Now, I've seen this happen. Leaders then go out into their departments, into their teams, and they communicate very different things.
Or not at all.
Or not at all. And what that causes is resentment, politics, maybe a feeling of unfairness, right? And that's probably going to decrease your morale and engagement of the folks, right? A lack of clarity from that executive team as it trickles down has really, really negative effects on the health of your organization. If you can start with, all right, here's what we're committing to. Here are the action items. Here's who's going to carry out these action items. And here's the date when we're going to get those action items done by. And now here is what we're going to communicate to our teams and the rest of the organization, right? And that's a good place to camp for a little bit if you're working with your team on commitment, to just say, if it's a small team, can we just kind of go around here and just reiterate what we're going to communicate? And then D, of course, is just all about the decision that you made altogether, right? Which is the core of what all the ABCD is all about.
Absolutely. Yeah. The decision is, let's be super clear what we decided, Yeah. I think that's what you were just saying, Ethan, about, managing the message a little bit before you leave the room. I just want to reiterate that I've seen that's such an easy thing to miss, isn't it? For a team to, here's what we've decided and we're done. And then everyone communicates something different. And then you get these weird mixed messages, and all of that is going to it's going to create a situation where you just don't get to your results. Right.
Right.
So I think a lot of this level called commitment, it's really close to the concept of clarity. Like I think those go really hand in hand. Establishing clarity has to happen before you get to commitment. So all these ABCDs, it's about just being really explicit about what we've decided and what the message is and what the action items are. And then you get to, and this can sometimes feel a little maybe corny or redundant, but I really like to see a group explicitly commit, however that looks. And I've seen it look a lot of different ways, but we've made this decision. We are committed to this decision. I want to make sure that everybody in the room has their skin in the game on that. So there's been times I've seen groups where every person has actually said something that indicated their commitment to the decision or the path that this group has decided on. I've seen situations where the leader said, all right, I just want to look around the room. I need some sign, some body language that says you are committed to this decision. You're on board. Look around the room. I see heads nodding, right? Something that there's this moment. I think it's important that a group commits.
I've heard about leaders even saying, all right, silence means you're not committing to this. That's all I'm going to say here. Silence means you're not committing to that. That's the assumption moving forward. And I think, there's just at the psychological level, when someone has to either verbally say I commit or raise their hand or, do some sort of sign or gesture that shows that they commit, they can't then rightfully go back and say, well, I never really committed to that anyway. So that's why I'm not, carrying it out.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And a couple other kind of just small things that I shouldn't say small things. I think they matter. Writing down the commitment. And then I want to add circling back. That's probably another easy ball to drop is, at the last meeting, this is where we ended. This is what we decided. Let's state that again. Is there anything that's come up between now and then that, would cause us to make any adjustments? I just want to make sure that we all are on the same page.
Absolutely. And I think what you're talking about there is just, setting up systems for follow-up. I've been guilty of this at times. We make commitments, but then, we don't do anything to make sure that those happen, right? So, again, with the ABCD, you're creating the action plans and talking about who's going to do them and by when, make sure there's a mechanism to check in. And again, that's a really good thing to happen at, the next team meeting or the next several team meetings, right? It's really helpful to, again, draft up the commitments you made, send them out in the email, maybe ask one more time. Is there anything that's not clear about this? Any other questions on this? So just, taking some sustainability practices with all your commitments, and don't just assume that because we talked about them, it's all going to happen. Make sure there's a follow-up.
Yeah. And just one thing with that, Ethan, I tend to think there should not be very many decisions that are emergency decisions, right? I mean, it's going to happen for sure.
Mm-hmm.
But I think a lot of organizations create their own emergencies. Suddenly we have to make this decision today because, we're behind the 8 ball and we weren't proactive. And the reason I'm saying that is because I think I've just seen a lot of times where it makes sense to actually take 2 meetings to do the whole thing. Right. And doesn't mean the whole meeting, right? But you might take part of this one meeting and part of this next meeting. So the second meeting might be where, everyone has now had a chance to process and there's been a lot of great discussion already at the first meeting. You've gotten partway there. You can complete the process in the next meeting and start doing some of these other pieces that we've just talked about. So then the third meeting would be that review, that follow-up. Let's check in on our action plans. Let's create our mechanisms like you've just described. So I just want to throw that in there that, we don't, if you find yourself doing a lot of, we have to decide right now, there's probably a different problem in the organization.
So that's commitment. Make sure you take the time to create clarity. And, once you've made commitments amongst a team, well, now we can move into this other level, which is all about accountability. What do we mean when we're talking about accountability?
We're talking about 3 kinds of accountability here. We're talking about personal accountability, which kind of directly flows from commitment, right? If I've made a commitment to something, then it's obviously up to me to make it happen. Like I need to focus on my buy wins. I need to be responsible and follow through so I don't let down my teammates. The second level in accountability is, do we have a leader who's willing to hold people accountable? That you need to have a leader that holds people accountable because that sets the upper bar right there for the level of accountability that people will exercise with one another. And then the third level, which is probably the most powerful, is our ability to hold one another accountable, peer-to-peer accountability, mutual accountability. And that's not going to happen if we don't have psychological safety and if we didn't make commitments.
Absolutely. And, again, if you did make those commitments, you did the ABCD, right? One of the key pieces for holding people accountable there is, having a culture of feedback. But I think what we're talking about here is the ability and willingness to give feedback in a way that's healthy, right? To give feedback in a way that is focused on behaviors. And also having the skills amongst your team to be able to receive that feedback non-defensively. And so I think that's a very simplified version of what we're saying as far as a culture of feedback. Do you want to say anything more about that?
Yeah, I guess I want to start with the fact that I think most groups I've worked with have identified this as the hardest part of this entire model. To make a commitment to actually approach another team member and say, hey, I'm disappointed. To have those conversations, it's just hard for most people. And so I start with this, again, the psychological safety. You have to keep building it and talking about it. I think there's courage, which is another factor that, thing that factors in here. There's commitment to this action that we all make to one another, but it's worth it, right?
Right. And just know that as human beings, receiving feedback can tend to make us feel defensive. There is an art to giving feedback, so it actually works. In fact, we have a few episodes on that, on giving feedback. That's episodes 7, 8, and 10. Link to those in the show notes. But I want to circle back to what you were talking about, kind of the leader of that group modeling the behaviors that you want to see, right? And a question I hear come up is, should I be holding my team accountable kind of in public, meaning as an executive team's meeting? Should I hold a individual person accountable there? Or might that actually hurt psychological safety, and that accountability conversation should be done in private? I've heard that question come up, and I wanted to know, if you have any thoughts about that and the best way to approach the, private versus group accountability conversations.
Yeah, the answer is yes.
Yes. Okay, good. Moving on then.
I mean, it's so complex because the answer really is yes, all the above, but it's an art. It really has to do with some of the factors. How much psychological safety do we have now? Starting out with private conversations makes more sense. As a group, though, develops psychological safety and they are able to be more authentic during the meeting, you start to see a shift if the leader is artful about it, and the team members as well, right?
I agree. It's an art, and it's a matter of, what is the trust and safety on the team like. But given there's at least some level of psychological safety on the team, I do think there's something to be said about being able to have those conversations with the whole group.
If it's been a group commitment, I'm agreeing with you, because if it's a group commitment, but then it's a private accountability when something goes wrong, there's a mismatch there. Mm-hmm. But again, you're right. It's an art, and there's all those adaptive skills that we've talked about in previous episodes on how to have that conversation and how to give that feedback.
So with peer-to-peer accountability, right, that can also be an art, right? And there are specific behaviors to make sure that that's being done well and with respect and continues to build trust and psychological safety. And so talk to me a little bit more about peer-to-peer accountability and what that would look like on a healthy team.
Yeah, to me, it's kind of one of those signs that a group has kind of crossed a line into a really healthy place when you see peer accountability taking place. And I say that because it is so hard. And I've seen a lot of groups get right up to that and can't get over that hump. Let's really talk with our teams about why this really matters and how it should show up, and get the team to talk about it. Get the team to talk about, for example, what's it going to take for me to feel safe giving feedback to others on this team? What's it going to take? And I've seen some really good discussions. We have to have a commitment to not punishing each other. And by punish, I mean, get upset, show a lot of defensiveness, make a lot of excuses. And then this gets a little meta, right? If I am in a situation like that and I give you feedback, Ethan, and you get defensive and you push back, can I give you feedback about that? Can we talk about that? Can we have a conversation about our conversation? So that commitment to receiving feedback, and then, like I said earlier, giving proactive permission to each other to come talk to me. I ended a meeting just a couple of weeks ago. There was about 7 or 8 people in the room. Every person, one at a time, went around the room and said their version. It was all different wording, but they all said, hey guys, I give you permission to talk to me when I'm not following through on my commitments. And someone else said, I want to be a better manager and I want to be a good team member. I give you permission. They all said it. And I think that's a really great exercise, because now you've heard it out of their own mouth. You've heard them commit to it, right?
That's right. And again, giving feedback is a skill. It's an art. Receiving feedback is a skill. It's an art. Check out those episodes. We'll, as I said, we'll link to the show notes. And we were talking about commitment earlier. I think actually an important commitment to make is making commitments about holding each other accountable, right? So say in that meeting where you're landing on some commitments, right? You're getting a lot of clarity around it. Even take time in that meeting to say, and will we also be committed here to holding each other accountable when we see one of our teammates slip or not follow through on what they said they were going to do, right? And so it's an opportunity to build kind of the expectations right there that it's going to be okay to hold each other accountable, right? And I think that's a really important thing to call out when you're making commitments, to circle back to the accountability piece of these commitments.
I love that idea. I had thought of it that way, but I don't want to say everything you just said, but when you're making commitment, commit to accountability, mutual accountability. I love that.
Yeah. And I do also want to say that, there are certain kinds of accountability. And from my experience, there's one kind that's easier to hold people accountable for than the other, right? For instance, if you missed your sales targets, right, that's pretty objective, right? You can say, well, you didn't hit your sales targets for this year, right? That's one piece. That's typically easier for people to hold each other accountable on, because again, it's not talking specifically about them and their behaviors. Behaviors, I find, can actually be harder for people to hold their teammates accountable for, right? Because at that point, you're saying there's something about how you showed up that is not helpful here, right? And that can be harder for people to do. And I know people, some people more than others could want to avoid that. But I do just want to say, and this is actually, a point that Lencioni talked about in his book on this model. He actually calls it an act of love to hold people accountable. To not hold somebody accountable to behaviors that will be detrimental to that team or might be detrimental to them in the future is actually doing them a disservice, right? So you're actually showing up with some love, if I can say that, by being willing to hold people accountable for those behaviors.
Yeah, that's really true.
Yeah.
I love it. And it makes it easier to hold people accountable to objective things or behaviors if there has been a commitment to those behaviors, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Hey, there's another just quick thought here. I want to just sideways throw in the concept of grace and compassion and self-compassion. And every time we have this conversation with a team, we always have to stop and say, look, we are not going to be perfect, right? We are not, no one is going to live up to these expectations and these commitments perfectly. And we make room for that, and holding people accountable and also offering grace. Those things are not mutually exclusive. In fact, they work better together than they work separately, right? And so to be able to keep in mind that you are human and I am human and we're going to fail and we're going to give each other grace doesn't mean I'm not going to say anything, but I am going to understand that environment. I think that culture of both self-compassion and outward directed compassion creates more safety, right? More psychological safety. It allows us to be more humble and show up with more, hey, I'm sorry, or I messed up, more authenticity. So I just want a shout out to a culture that also has embedded and woven through it grace and compassion for one another and for ourselves.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful. And I concur completely. Grace for each other. Nobody's perfect. People will have setbacks. People will forget to follow through. People will, it's going to happen, right? If someone's having the ability to hold two things that might seem dichotomous at once, which is holding each other accountable, but having grace at the same time. I think that's a great place to end the accountability piece, and we're winding down on this episode, but we do want to briefly touch on the very top of this pyramid, which is results, right? It's a North Star with all of these behaviors and skills we're talking about, is to achieve the results. And just to briefly, again, kind of walk you through the journey that we've gone through, we started this series off by talking about trust, right? The ability to build psychological safety on the team, in which that can feed into the ability to handle and engage in authentic conversation or conflict, right? To be able to openly discuss ideas and differing opinions. So really, you can land on the best decision. When people have had a chance to say what they really think on that topic or decision, right, then you can get to a commitment, right? Even if people disagree, if they've had a chance to have their voice be heard, they can usually commit, right? And commitment is about creating clarity, right? What exactly are we committing to? What are the actions? When will we do this by, and who will do it, right? What will we communicate, and getting really clear on that communication, right? And maybe even a commitment around holding each other accountable for these things, which of course then leads into accountability, which is leader holding the team accountable and modeling that behavior, peers holding each other accountable, holding yourself accountable, and all of that feeds into results. Talk to me a bit about results.
Yeah, the path you just spelled out there is one of the two main concepts here. It's just, in a sense, you can say you are so much more likely to achieve your goals if all those other things are in place, right? And one way to put that is, if you've made a decision, let's assume that our decision was a fairly good decision, right? That if all the pieces were to fall into place, this decision is going to lead to something good. Well, if we're committed to that decision because it's super clear and it was, everybody knows what we're doing and we're holding each other accountable for that, that's more likely that those different steps and action items are actually going to happen, which just automatically means it's more likely that that decision will bear fruit, that decision will work. So, I mean, the bottom line is, one of the two concepts is, you do all those other things well and you keep building those other things, you're much more likely to have follow through and sustainability and decisions that don't become flavor of the year and everybody understands and they're all communicated and good things happen, right? So that's the first of the two concepts. It just happens automatically.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Then what's the second of the two concepts?
The other thing is, it's an overall concept. It's a philosophy that's really important for leadership teams to hold. And it is the concept of first team. It's the idea that this team of leaders is my first team, as opposed to my first team happens to be the department that I represent. And let's just take a couple minutes on this. It's the idea that I am committed to your success and you are committed to my success, even though I'm the head of accounting and you're the head of marketing and our worlds don't have that much interaction or that much overlap, but I'm committed to your success and you're committed to my success, because we believe that the success of this team means the success of the organization. And it's contrasted to sort of the League of Nations approach, which means I am the director of accounting, so I come to this team solely to advocate for my accounting group and to get what we want and what we need. And you're coming here advocating for your marketing group. And when we disagree, I'm going to try to get what I want and you're going to try to get what you want. And there's only limited resources and limited time. So there's winners and losers. And, it's all about me winning because I want to be successful as the director of accounting, right? Well, that is going to create winners and losers, and we're going to lack synergy, and we're going to lack sort of what happens when everybody is committed to everyone else's success. So it's just a concept and a mindset that overlays all the stuff we've been talking about during these last several episodes.
Yeah, very good. And just to kind of build on something you said there, this is our first team, right? We are committed to the success of this team first, which means that this executive team's or leadership team's top priorities are everybody's top priorities.
Right.
Yeah, you're going to go back to your apartment and you'll have your own individual priorities as well, but the priorities of this team are above all, which can be hard for people, right? It could mean that, that means some of the budget needs to come out of the marketing department to go into the sales department, because we've decided as executive team, this, the sales in this area needs to be our top priority, right? And so it does take some humility there, right? It takes a lot of adaptive skills that we've talked a lot about on this podcast, but the point being, it's everybody's top priority.
Right. Yeah. And that's so good. And A recent example was an organization that decided, and not to get into the nitty gritty here, but they really wanted to improve their workplace culture in a general way. And I won't break that down for us here, but it was a big undertaking. And everybody on the leadership team had to agree that this was one of our top 3 priorities. And everyone had to agree with that. And at first it was really interesting because there was a couple of members of the team that were saying things like, well, the culture in our department's fine. And so therefore I don't have anything to do here. And that's your problem, not my problem. And it was really cool to see them realize, wait, that's not how this works, right? I mean, if we want to improve the culture of this organization, then we're all going to have to look at not just our departments, but how we can help serve the other departments and how we can collaborate better and what's it going to take. And it really was about everybody being on the same page. And I think you said this well. It doesn't mean I'm not going to still represent my group or advocate, of course, right? But that's going to be just a little bit lower in my priority than the success of this team.
Absolutely. Well said. And, I won't get into this piece too much here, but there's also a few kind of roadblocks to look for in terms of achieving results and having, a team number one where everybody shares the top priorities, right? There's structural issues that you may need to look at, right? If you have, incentive systems that are set up, based on your own individual departments or performance, right? Well, you actually create kind of a zero-sum game, right? And so you actually need to align your incentives and your systems that allows for collaboration and allows for the executive team to be focused on the same goal, right? And so anyways, that's a whole nother podcast episode probably of talking about that. But the point here is, when you can build trust and, master conflict and healthy dialogue and authentic conversations, you'll reach commitments and people can walk away knowing exactly what they're committing to. And they'll be more willing to hold each other accountable because they've all committed to that. And that's where the results happen. So there you go.
Ethan, great summary. That was like a 12-second summary of what we've been talking about for the last, 6 episodes. So good job.
So there you have it, folks. That concludes our series here on building healthy teams. Hope you enjoyed it. Anything else you want to say? Close this up here.
I'll just say that, of course, there's about 4,007 other things we can talk about in the realm of healthy teams. And I bet you we'll talk about several of them in the next many, many episodes.
Sounds good. All right. Before we go here, folks, just a quick plug. This April 2022, we will be having our signature management and leadership workshop series available to the general public. It's going to be 5 days and 5 consecutive weeks. Just real quickly, Mike, tell them a little bit about that Managing with Mind and Heart workshop series.
I hope some of you will come. It's such a fun thing to do with a mixed group of people from all over the place, but it's a day of building morale and understanding the leadership mindset and understanding the power differential and lots of really cool discussions around the top 15 management skills. The second day is around behavior styles and learning to understand people and understanding yourself. And that's a really fun day. Third day is all about holding people accountable and building a culture of accountability and dealing with difficult situations and behaviors that come up. The fourth day is all about the culture, but it breaks it down into lots of separate pieces like the decision-making model you've heard us talk about, and triangulation and gossip and fairness and praise and recognition and several other pieces. The fifth day, we spend a ton of time on communication and meetings and remote meetings and email. And then we end the whole thing with a really important conversation around sustainability and making sure that we're not doing flavor of the year. I'll just say it's super practical. You'll walk away with a lot of skills that you can practice that very next day at work. And it's also fun.
Well, there you have it. This April 2022, you can go to our website to register. We'll have a link in the show notes to that. There are limited spots, so get your spot.
And I think we forgot to say that this is a virtual training. It's not in a physical location. So if anyone was wondering, where do I have to go for this? The answer is your home office.
We hope to see you there. Thanks for tuning in, folks. We have a lot of fun ideas and plans for future podcast episodes. So keep listening, share, subscribe, and we will see you next time.